Can you see my screen? Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, as was mentioned before, I'm a special needs planning attorney, which means I spend a lot of time in the probate courts handling guardianships, but I also do a lot of alternatives to the guardianship and long-term planning. Lots of special needs trusts, whether it's for long-term planning, updating wills, making sure there's a good estate plan in the future, or also special needs trusts to qualify for public benefits. My greatest experience, though, comes by virtue of me being a mom of a child with special needs. As was mentioned, my daughter's 26 now. Her name's Angela, and that's where I learn most of the things that I'm really good at, because that's how we learn as parents. So I just want to touch on we only have a few minutes, so just a few of the issues from a legal perspective that we as parents need to consider. First of all, guardianships and alternatives. Mark has already mentioned that. Let me see. It's important to understand that our children, once they hit age 18, our authority to make decisions for them really does cease. Now, sometimes we can get away with it as parents a little longer, but if we're not parents, if it's a sibling or someone stepping in, it's usually a problem, and it often becomes a problem in some kind of situation. So we all need to think about this. We have several options. Our kids can represent themselves. Guardianship can be appointed in the court system, or as Mark mentioned, we always want to look at least restrictive alternatives. So is there something we can do that is less restrictive for our children? There are two types of guardianships: guardianship of the person and guardianship of the estate. Guardianship of the person means that you will be making medical decisions, making decisions about where your child will live. We want to look at less restrictive alternatives. One alternative would be a medical power of attorney. If your child has the ability to sign that document, of course after they're 18 is when they sign it, then they can just appoint you to make those decisions. Supported decision-making agreements, we've already kind of touched on that. I will say supported decision-making agreements, that does not give you the authority to make a decision for your child, just to assist your adult child in making their own decisions. So I would never recommend relying only on a supported decision-making agreement, but it could be part of a plan along with a medical power of attorney. We can also have limited guardianships. We always do want to make sure there's not a less restrictive alternative. But if your child has significant disabilities and does not understand a medical power of attorney document, then that's not an option. So there are many times where guardianship is absolutely the right response and the right approach. Guardianship of the estate, this is handling the money. So most guardianships in Texas are guardianships of the person and estate, because most guardianships are for elderly people. However, in this audience, I'm assuming most of us are parents. We can usually avoid a guardianship of the estate, and if you need a guardianship, it can just be guardianship of the person. Some alternatives to guardianship of the estate would be, if your child has capacity, they could sign a power of attorney, again, a supported decision-making agreement. But look at this number 3, a Social Security representative payee. We can avoid guardianship of the estate by managing our children's SSI benefits or SSDI benefits as representative payees. We don't have to be guardians to help with that. We can also help manage assets by becoming trustees of special needs trusts. And that is really important for parents like us. There's two types of special needs trusts: a first-party trust, that's a type of trust that's funded with assets that belong to the individual with disabilities, and a third-party trust, and this is where anyone else donates money into the trust account. So this would be your typical planning ahead, leaving an inheritance for your child with special needs. I'm just going to go quickly through these slides. The main thing to remember about first-party trust, besides the fact that it's the person with disability, their money, is it does have a Medicaid payback on that trust. So that means if there's any money left in that trust, when the individual with disabilities dies, Medicaid will put a claim on the remaining assets. We use first-party special needs trusts to keep someone qualified for benefits, say a personal injury settlement is received or an inheritance is received outright rather than being directed to a trust. We can always move those assets into a first-party special needs trust. Or there are some things that by law need to go to a first-party special needs trust. Military Survivor Benefit Plan, SBP, those payments need to go into a first-party trust. Child support, if your child is going to be eligible for lifetime child support, that child support needs to go to a first-party special needs trust. I'm sorry to just whip through these things. There's lots we could say, but we're going to just give a quick overview. The third-party special needs trust, that does not have a Medicaid payback on it. This is what we as parents would want to set up so that if we want to leave anything for our children, it's directed to this trust. And then we can determine where any remaining assets will go, presumably to our other children or charity or whatever we choose. What can a special needs trust be used for? Pretty much anything, as long as it's for the benefit of the person with disabilities. So we have lots of options. Big question about whether or not a special needs trust can pay for food and shelter. Usually can, as long as the trust was drafted correctly. It may affect certain benefits, the main one being SSI. If a trust pays for food and shelter, it may reduce the SSI by 1/3. There are lots of ways we can work around that, and so we'll move on, but just know that it is definitely possible for the trust to contribute to food and shelter payments. Who can be the trustee? This is the big decision. Typically, parents will start out being the initial trustees, but we have to think very carefully about who the appropriate trustee would be when we're no longer available. It might be another sibling of the individual with disabilities. It might be a bank. It might be a trust company. If we have a hard time coming up with either a corporate trustee or an individual that we're comfortable with, we can always use a nonprofit organization such as the Arc of Texas and have a pooled trust. That's where many people pool their funds together, and the nonprofit organization acts as trustee. Lots of benefits of special needs trusts, not just preserving government benefits, but providing some protection for our children and making sure we avoid guardianship of the estate. I know we've had a session earlier on ABLE accounts, so I'm not going to go into detail here, but ABLE accounts are sort of in the genre of special needs trust. They are only for people who are disabled before the age of 26, and there are limits on the amount of money that can be contributed to an ABLE account. That means that you can't leave a large inheritance to an ABLE account, and you wouldn't want to anyway, because this is Medicaid payback. That's an important thing to understand. The money left in an ABLE account when the individual passes away is subject to a Medicaid payback. So again, ABLE accounts are a great option, but usually they should be used in conjunction with a special needs trust. An ABLE account should not replace the third-party trust. And I have a chart that compares different trusts and ABLE accounts. I think it was uploaded. If you can't access it, feel free to email me or call me and I'll send you a copy of that. Main thing to leave is estate planning really is critical for families with special needs children. We can't just leave it to chance, or a lot of problems can happen. And I also want to emphasize, you don't want to just count on disinheriting your child with special needs or leaving the assets to a sibling. It goes wrong in 100 different ways, so be careful of that. I think I'm about running out of time, so let me just comment quickly on Social Security disability benefits. If you feel like this picture, you just want to pull your hair out, you're not alone. It is complicated. Generally speaking, Social Security disability insurance is the insurance we get when we pay our FICA taxes in case we become disabled. And so if someone is eligible for SSDI, or Social Security disability insurance, they'll receive a monthly payment and Medicare after a waiting period. To receive that disability, they have to be medically determined to be disabled, and they have to be technically eligible. A child is easy to meet that determination. A lot of our kids are in special education. They're going to meet that determination of being disabled just by their diagnoses and the fact that they have significant impairments. When our children become adults, the criteria changes and it's more related to work ability. The official language is substantial gainful activity. Again, this could be an hour-long presentation just on substantial gainful activity, but you just need to understand that the disability, just because your child has the diagnosis, does not mean they automatically qualify for SSI or SSDI. To qualify for the disability insurance, you need to have work credits. Your age determines how many work credits you need to qualify. And if you need to find that out, you can create a login account with Social Security. This, I do want to emphasize this. That insurance covers not just me if I become disabled, but it can also cover my spouse, any minor children I may have, or a disabled adult child. A disabled adult child can draw off of a parent's work record once they are over the age of 18 and not married, if their disability began before the age of 22 and they now have a parent who has passed away or become disabled themselves or retired. This is a significant benefit. So if you're not familiar with childhood disability benefits, please reach out to me and I'm happy to walk you through that. Technical denial, you may be denied Social Security benefits just because you don't have enough work credits. That's very common. That's when you go into the SSI system. That is the needs-based system where you can only have very limited income and assets. You have to still be determined as medically disabled, but this time the technical eligibility has to do with how much money you have in the bank and how much income you have coming in. We're not going to have time to get into this, but Social Security looks at a lot of different types of income. For example, in-kind support and maintenance is income. They call it income because you're getting free housing. Maybe a child is living with their parent. Deemed income, if I'm married, my spouse's income counts as mine. My income counts for any children under the age of 18, so that's deemed income. Also limits on resource amount. A child who is now an adult and applying for SSI cannot have more than $2,000 in total resources. There are some exceptions. Some important ones, again, are special needs trusts and ABLE accounts. So that takes us back in a circle to why this planning is really important, to make sure that we have a plan in place to allow our children to get the resources, the government programs, the services that they need. And I realize I just whipped through that, and I'm happy to take questions, but if we don't have time today, please feel free to email me or call me. Happy to have a consultation with you, no charge. Just let me know. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. That was great. And yet there's so much ground to cover on that. And we only have a limited amount of time today. So I encourage anybody who has an interest in that area, definitely contact Allison. The internet is full of more information than you could ever sort through. There are different organizations that try and help with that, whether it's the ARC or what have you. But thank you so much. I think, Allison, if we can get you to unshare your screen.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Turn off screen sharing. We'll get everybody back here.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, trying.
Okay, we have something. Well, it looks like we have your desktop.
Nope. Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, hold on. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to figure out where my unsharing is.
So if you take your cursor down to the bottom of the screen, which says share screen, it should.
Yeah, I can't get back to that big screen.
You can also go to the top. Let's see if I can turn it off.
Video, open video. Let me sign out and I'll sign back in and see if that helps, because I cannot find that. I'm so sorry, everyone.
All right, we'll see you in a minute.
Okay.
All right, well, we still have Allison's screen. There we go. All right.
Okay.
Okay. Darren.
So sorry.
No worries. No worries. All right, we're all good. Darren's sharing. Awesome. Thank you, Darren. Take it away.
All right, guys. First of all, thanks for having me this afternoon. And, as Mark shared with you earlier, and Allison just, even though quickly went through, there's a lot of things that as a parent of a special needs child or adult child that you need to work on a team. So Mark shared with us earlier that PCP model, which is what, kind of that personal centered planning. And so part of that role is to make sure as you build, feel free to leverage others. Allison, use Mark's, the professional networks that he's building. But being a financial planner, we're part of the community and part of that team. Okay. So part of our role is to help answer questions around the financial piece, the fiduciary role, helping the trustee understand their role and making sure that they don't void any Medicaid or Medicare programs or any means tested programs that are out there. And we do rely heavily, and I usually work best a lot of times with people like Allison, the attorney world, and the accountant, because our role as financial planners really start with mom and dad. So first thing we have to make sure is that mom and dad are taken care of. Kind of think of that as when you jump on an airplane, first thing they tell you in the emergency briefing is if unexpected cabin pressure loss is to put the mask on yourself first, then any other, people who need help. That's my role. Once we've done that, in a special care situation, then we start working on the things that Allison walked you through. So part of our role is to help manage the assets that are in those first and third party special needs trusts, as well as the ABLE accounts. With that, we can provide that fiduciary role, manage the asset, help make sure that the assets grow, generate income, and are there when your child needs them. And make sure the biggest part is work with Allison in the accounting world to make sure that we're not taking any undue asset, make sure it gets to the right folks and doesn't void any means tested programs. And that's one of the biggest things you do in these PCP planning style roles is, as long as there's great communication, one is you'll have much more efficient use of and getting your loved one taken care of, and making sure we don't get them kicked out of a program, because as Mark kind of shared with you earlier, expect 18 months to 18 years, but once you get kicked off, it's, you're back in line to get back on. So that's why it's integral to make sure that everybody's communicating, because no one action stands in a silo. So our role is to make sure those assets grow, they're managed properly. We provide the fiduciary role, and to Allison's point, we can provide the trustee service as well, or we can work with your trustee to make sure that your wishes are carried out for the entirety of the special needs trust. A lot of times people think in our world that the special needs trust needs to be funded with assets while they're living. It can wait until upon death of the parents. So just know sometimes that requires a tailoring of specific types of products around life insurance to be tailored around the need of the child and what you want to see happen long term. We also work on those ABLE accounts as well. So our role is really to help mom and dad make sure they maintain their financial independence, and then pass down and make sure, to Allison's point, we're not disinheriting any child. We're making sure the assets are growing and generating the income they need, and then really making sure that nobody gets voided of any means tested programs or any waiver programs that they're currently on. And you would be remiss that we didn't say some of the things that Allison talked about around, it can be as simple as the account that you set up is improperly labeled or titled. We've seen that a lot of times. Your beneficiary that you set up is not proper from other, well-intentioned grandparents or loved ones that want to make sure they leave some dollars for your son or daughter, but they don't do it the right way, and it goes directly to the son or daughter. Nobody tells anybody, and then all of a sudden they're kicked off the program. So part of our role is to manage assets, communicate with the other team members, and making sure that your loved one is taken care of for the remainder of their lives, even while you're here and eventually when you're gone, like Mark described. So like I said, it's kind of our role is very humbling to be part of it. I've been part of the IDD community since 1984. I've been in financial services for over 20 years, but really been focused the last 3 or 4 years in the community when it was kind of a cross-section of my volunteer work between Sapphire, being a board member, Special Olympics running programs and being on their board, and the people asking me, hey, from a financial point of view, what should I do? And really the last 3 years have been focused on making sure I answer those questions for the community that I love. So I'll turn it back to Mark to kind of allow us to get into the Q&A part of today's show. But thanks for everyone for joining.
Awesome. Thanks, Darren. And appreciate all that. That's a great graphic, by the way. It really does tell the story about all the different pieces that come into play on this. I think one thing that really jumps out at me over the last few years is that there are more and more professionals like yourself and Allison, attorneys and financial planners who are focused on families and adults with disability where there didn't used to be before. And that's one of the reasons that and this isn't a promotion for MassMutual. One of the things I really do like about what MassMutual is doing is you have the certified special needs consultants, right? So you guys are specialists. You understand how to work with families with disabilities who can have, you know, very different financial profiles than other families. And Allison, it's a labyrinth of things that we have to navigate through the benefit system, through the legal system, and what have you, just to make sure we have everything set up for our sons and daughters. And to both of your points, that we don't screw it up. I am looking in the Whova app at questions, and that'll be the first place I'll look for any Q&A. We don't have a ton of participants on here. I don't know if at any point, Melanie, you'd want to just open up the mic and people could just talk. But let me take the two questions that I have right here, and we'll get those answered right away. So the first one, and I think, Allison, this might be for you, but Darren, jump in if it's for you as well. I see a question: how should families choose a reliable trustee?
That's a fabulous question, and I think it's one of the most difficult questions to answer as we make this long-term plan, because we know that we will do anything for our children. We're completely trustworthy, but what happens when we as parents are not around? When you select a trustee, you need to understand that that trustee is going to have complete access to the money if this is a special needs trust, and most likely the beneficiary will not know if that trustee is mishandling the account. And so you want to make sure you are very, very comfortable with that trustee. If you have a family member that is completely trustworthy and you think they have the ability to invest the funds, to go to Mass Mutual, set up an account, or, you know, most likely they could do it themselves, but have the ability to get some help, then you could name a family member. Generally speaking, if you have a significant amount of wealth that you plan to leave to a special needs trust, I would recommend a corporate trustee. It's going to be worth the money that you pay to have that professional assistance. And as I mentioned before, if you just don't have enough money to qualify for that corporate trustee assistance, and you don't have a family member that you 100% trust to manage this, then you could go with a nonprofit trustee. There are pooled trusts that will provide a trustee, and these pooled trusts will handle first-party trusts and third-party trusts.
Yeah, and we actually have experience with the pooled trust, and they actually do a great job in Texas with the master pool trust. The woman who runs it is very accessible. It seems to be effective, so I think they do a good job. Allison, while I have you for a second, I was thinking trustee, but then I also went to thinking about guardianship or alternative forms of protection. And the thing that I think a lot of people don't think about is, all right, I set somebody up, I've got guardianship, okay, I've got my guardianship, or I've got whatever in place, but what happens if I pass away suddenly? What about succession for that protection?
Right. Once someone's under a guardianship, they're always under a guardianship. So if the court-appointed guardian, well, I say always, you can have your rights restored, but generally speaking, if the parent dies, the guardianship continues, and the court will want to know who the parent recommended. The first place the judge is going to want to look is in a will. So everyone with a child under guardianship needs to have a will where you specifically name the successor guardian. Now, it doesn't mean it happens automatically. You still have to go to the court, and the judge is going to make that successor guardian watch a video and get qualified, run a criminal background check to make sure the judge agrees. But parents are going to be able to specify who they think should follow them. There's also a separate document which you could complete in case you were incapacitated but still living. But the most important one, again, is the will. That's where the judge is going to ask to look. And this is critical. If you have an individual, a family member who would logically be the next in line because they're the closest relative, and you feel like they are not an appropriate guardian for your child, you do need to create a separate document specifically disqualifying that individual, because the judge is going to look at the closest relatives first.
That's a great answer, and I get that question from parents all the time. The second question that we've got here is, any agencies who work with clients with disabilities, do they tell them about future planning 101? So I believe the person asking this question is asking whether you're going, for example, we're in Bexar County, so we work with ACOG. work with several other groups and Superior for our insurance and so on and so forth. Are any of those agencies kind of walking you through this future planning process? And I have to say, generally not. They're really focused on their one piece of the puzzle and not trying to help you put all the pieces together. Now, if you get lucky, and I feel fortunate right now, we've got some really good people that we're working with in the different agencies we're working with, and they actually seem to be trying really hard on our behalf. But that's not always the case everywhere. You get folks who don't know, they're new, they're not as experienced, and it can be a challenge. So I wish more groups have looked at future planning. That's actually really why the ARC created the whole future planning center that they have, and the whole curriculum, and a network of certified people like myself who can help you to figure that out. But yeah, I wouldn't say that it's terribly widespread. Darren, I had a question for you. Maybe you can help folks with this. So I would imagine that there are adults with disabilities or families out there who say, God, financial planning, I mean, we've spent so much money just trying to get to this point. How do we put a plan together? What's that conversation like when we sit with Darren and we don't have giant buckets of money? Like, what can we do, and when should we start doing it?
I get that question a lot, Mark, when whether it's from whether you're a little bit older, younger, just starting a family, whatever that looks like, is people have that question a lot because they don't know where to start. And most of the time they default to, I need to have money or these buckets of money to do something with. And it's really not. To do financial planning at any particular point in life, number one is you've got to decide that you want to. That's step one. You've got to make a decision that I want to address it. Find a professional that you trust, and it is a relationship business, so that you will, sit down, share where you are now financially and where you want to go. They're going to ask you to share some financial information. So it's a little bit, you got to be willing to share, so to speak, and you let them financially expose yourself to them so that they can find out and put together the roadmap for you. And most planners out there will tell you, and they'll be very upfront. Some are fee-based, some are commission-based, some do some complementary between the two that receive commissions and do some complementary planning. But ask them how they're compensated. Make sure you think you can work with them and trust them. But when it comes to doing financial planning, it's not about having a bunch of money. It's about wanting to start. And if you're willing to go through a process of discovery, education, and it's probably a 3 or 4 meeting process to come up with what a financial strategy is, and you're willing to execute, that's what it takes to do financial planning. Because they will be able to make some small adjustments for you. You may be doing a lot of things very well and only need to change 1 or 2 things. There might be things that are, a little bit more substantial that you may need to change. And, like I said, they're always going to take advantage of the things you have available to your employer through these programs that we're talking about. Make sure you're aware of those and to be part of that team. But the biggest misconception that it takes buckets of money to do it. You'd be surprised. I work with people who make $1.2 million and spend 1.4. Can't do anything for them. I have people who make $30,000 a year and save 10 of it. So it's just up to them. And Mark, I will tell you the one thing about, Allison talked about trustees earlier. In the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a couple of things that have come out of the elder law community that may apply here as well, to make sure that somebody's not abusing somebody's accounts or stealing and that type of thing. And on the accounts, if you're not able to have a corporate trustee, and maybe it's, a friend or a family member, you can put what they refer to as a trusted contact on those accounts now, that the advisor, if something starts to look wrong, they can call somebody else and give them permission to talk about the account, to have that person go look into it. So there are a few things in addition to Alice's point. Pick somebody you trust, because they're going to have full access, right? They're going to have control, but you can also put a secondary person that, that came out of the elder law community that would apply here as well. So just some new things that have been coming down the pipe.
It's a great point.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That is a good point. So, the other thing that I think, first of all, I don't think anybody ever starts putting away money early enough, because we just don't think about it, right? I have, on a weekly basis, I get a call from a parent who says, my son or daughter is going to turn 18 in a month. what do I do? How do I do this? How do I do that? So for anybody who's listening in on here, you cannot start too early. Whether it's thinking about putting money aside into an account someplace so that it's going to be there when you're not around anymore and it has a chance to grow. Or actually, one other thing, and I just made a note here, and I'm not sure, Darren, if it's you or Allison, or maybe both of you can jump in on it. Can you guys talk about when families should be thinking about and getting a hold of life insurance, and what kinds of things, what forms of insurance should they be thinking about? And then how does that relate to the special needs trusts or the ABLE accounts?
Go ahead, Darren. I'll follow you up.
Yeah, so Mark, your first point of the question is, when should they be talking about life insurance? The first conversation needs to be when they care about somebody other than themselves. So usually that involves when they get married. That's usually the first time I see somebody saying, hey, I care about somebody else other than myself, and if I'm not here tomorrow, I want some capital for them to be taken care of to a certain extent. That's the first conversation. So that first conversation is usually just what amount of life insurance do you need to make that happen? We don't really, that may not be a product discussion or a type of life insurance. It's just how much do I get through work? And if I want to go buy something in the open market, usually I start in the term world that says, I want low out of pocket, and if I'm not here tomorrow, I need capital to take care of my spouse. The second conversation comes usually when if you're expanding your family and have children, then there might be some additional things you want to see happen. Things like pay for college education, maybe a spouse that, is not working, stay not working and take care of the kids if you weren't there. And so it goes much more into that amount of life insurance that you need, maybe that term conversation. The third component where it really starts to get is potentially those conversations around leaving a legacy, equalizing estates, or funding some of those trust conversations that Allison talked about earlier. Sometimes I may not have all of these assets, or the assets may be in a business, or the assets may be in land or retirement accounts. And, if I have multiple children, sometimes it's easy because they might want to grow or do something to give one child all of those type of assets. Well, in the trust, I can fund with potentially a life insurance more on a permanent side that will take $1 or $2 and maybe leave $4 or $5 in that trust, that will be, a little bit more efficient for them. It might be able to equalize the estate, or, to Allison's point earlier, not disinherit somebody because of those assets. So it's really, usually somebody's life, it's kind of a threefold conversation. When you first get married, you start expanding the family, and then at some point, you might want a permanent product when you do pass away, because we're not getting off the big blue ball alive, that there will be something there. And sometimes that's for liquidity, funding trust, or equalization.
And if I could just add, I think life insurance is a great way to fund a third-party special needs trust. If there's not a lot of assets on hand now, if you purchase that life insurance, sometimes even a second-to-die policy is more affordable. But it's a great way to make sure you have a third-party special needs trust that is funded. I get the same question, or an alternative of this: when do I need to do this special needs trust? How long do I have? And I always say, well, before you die. Let's hope you have decades to get this done. But none of us know for sure. And so, from the special needs trust perspective, need to remind everyone, if you don't do your planning ahead of time, what happens is if you don't have a will at all, the state of Texas will decide where your assets go. And there's a set formula. And if you've only had one marriage and all children are from the same marriage, it's likely what you would want, but it's going to be a lot more expensive to get there. If you have if you have different relationships, children from different marriages, it very likely may not be the way you would want your assets to be distributed. But no matter what, it's going to take a while to get it done. It's going to be expensive. And in the end, your child with special needs will inherit assets in their own name. What that means is it's going to cause lots of problems for these government programs you fought so hard to get your kids on, these Medicaid waiver programs. SSI or any other kind of Medicaid type, a needs-based program, there's going to be problems with qualification. And so that is going to be a nightmare for whoever's helping manage your child's life when you're gone, trying to get that sorted out. We can move those assets into a first-party special needs trust. If you had a will that just wasn't properly done, we can sometimes even reform the will. But all of that is expensive and a hassle. And again, once your child inherits money in their own name, the only type of special needs trust we can use is the first party trust with a Medicaid payback. So by planning ahead, in a way, you're protecting your other children, or wherever you want those remaining funds to go. I hope that made sense. So I think it's absolutely worth it. It doesn't have to cost a fortune. You don't have to have a ton of money. We typically fund a special needs trust in my office with a $10 bill. We literally tape a $10 bill to the last page and say, this is funded, and then you can add funds through life insurance or whatever you decide to do down the road.
And great from both of you. Thank you very much. I can tell you from my personal experience, I got the life insurance, the life insurance for my daughter probably later than I should have. Actually, not probably, definitely later than I should have. And it's way more expensive to pay into, to sort of build that value over time. So it is very expensive for me, but again, I got good counsel on it. I've got good plans in place. My daughter's taken care of. She actually would do very well if I passed away tomorrow. So, but we don't want that to happen. I wanted to follow up on a question that came in before, because I actually went into the app and I see that there was some follow up from the gentleman who asked it. The gentleman's name is Yenter. He asked about, do agencies tell you about future planning? And his follow-up was, is there any agency that's more focused to serve the deaf or ASL community? I'm still relatively new to Texas. I can't answer that question. Actually, the person who could probably answer it is Elizabeth, who's signing for us right now. And Elizabeth, I'd have no problem if you want to go ahead and answer that question. If you know agencies in particular that can help the deaf and ASL community. I'm not as familiar with that, but I know that in the states that I've worked in, both the deaf and the blind communities are definitely underserved. So I'm just going to shut up and let Elizabeth, if you have advice for him, please go ahead.
Oh, yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any resources, but you can probably ask my agency, Deaf Interpreter Services. They can refer you to other agencies that they know around San Antonio or around Texas, and hopefully they have resources.
If you went to look up that information, would he search Deaf Interpreter Services?
Yes, I believe the website is deaf-interpreter.com, I believe, or you can just look them up online and then call the office, I believe. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'm not prepared for that.
That's all right. Just wanted to throw that in there. So actually, I think we have time probably for sort of maybe one or two more questions and answers. And I don't have any more in the app. So let me just throw it out to you, Darren and Allison, whichever one of you wants to go first. I guess we've talked a lot about what things that people can do. But let's kind of just take the flip side of that. What is maybe the biggest thing that is your, sort of head smack moment that when you hear a family or somebody come in, you just go, oh my gosh, you shouldn't have done that, or I wish you hadn't done that, or that's clearly somebody got bad advice, or they made a giant mistake. That's someplace that you end up having to undo. Like what is the biggest thing you would tell families or adults to avoid in your respective disciplines?
Well, I'll go first. I would say one of the most frustrating thing for me is when someone has hired an attorney that doesn't really have the specialization they need, and they've had a special needs trust created and it contains a Medicaid payback. Because even though they didn't need it to be there, it's there, and Medicaid says, well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. They don't say, oh, I know you didn't need to give us this money. They say thank you and they take it, and that's very frustrating. Also, when people use an attorney who doesn't understand the Social Security system, the Medicaid system, then sometimes these trusts are not properly reported, and a family might think their documents are done correctly, and then when they pass away, it's usually the other family members that are trying to clean that up. And then the last thing I would say is, if your child is not appropriate for a guardianship, maybe their disabilities are not severe enough to need a guardianship, at least do powers of attorney or something to provide someone to make decisions and step in if needed. Not having anything in place is very risky, and that's the same for all of us. You know, we all will become elderly and could be, have dementia, Alzheimer's, all kinds of things happen. So we should all have a plan in place for someone to step in and make decisions for us to avoid these last-minute emergency guardianships, which are so expensive and so difficult. But for children with special needs, it's especially important to have a plan.
And Mark, from my side, it's really a couple things. Number one is just what you talked about earlier, thinking that they have to wait for a certain thing, asset level or time in life to get started. Always get started early. It'll be less expensive to you. They'll be more impactful, and you'll be able to make some, small changes now that make huge differences later on. That's number one. But one of the kind of scratch moments is usually around beneficiary reviews on accounts, workplace benefits, and those type of things. Even if they went to see Allison, a lot of times Allison says, hey, here's what to go do. Go change these things. Here's your estate plan. But if they don't change those beneficiaries per Allison's instructions, which sometimes is the last thing they do, if something bad happens, sometimes those assets go to ex-spouses. They go directly to the special care child, and that's not a good thing. So if anyone takes anything away today, one, make sure you get with Allison, but two, make sure you review your beneficiaries to make sure they're not going to somebody you don't want. And that's usually the biggest two things we see.
Yeah.
Mark, can I add one more?
Yeah, you can, absolutely.
And another, that's great, Darren. One other thing I would add is, if your child receives Social Security benefits, read those letters, because a lot of times benefits are lost unnecessarily. We could have done an appeal, we could have made a correction, but I know I have a daughter on SSI, and the letters are horrible, and it's frustrating to work with Social Security, and there's a lot of mistakes made, but don't ignore those letters. And same with Medicaid agency, do what you need to do to keep those benefits active. We do not want to be bumped to the very bottom of those waiting lists again. So, watch your mail and respond appropriately.
Yeah, and really what I'm taking away from both of you, and I made a note here because I confess I actually made this mistake. What I'm really hearing is review all of your documents, all your financials, your trust agreements, everything else, to make sure everything is up to date. Maybe there's been a change in the law, right, that where it benefits, or a change in a tax code, right, where it makes sense to come in and tweak what you're doing. Here's the one, and I'm going to guess that this happens to more families than we really realize. Update your address with the agencies that you get stuff from. If you move an SSI, or the Social Security Administration mails you stuff, but it doesn't go to that, maybe your forwarding order has expired or something like that, they'll go ahead and suspend your benefits until they hear from you. And then there's a whole process to go through that. I confess, I forgot a change of address one time, and I went through that exact process. We got it all restored, but just simple things about, every year, just put in your calendar. We're going to go through, we're going to review everything. We're going to make sure it's up to date, it's airtight. And that'll just cut so many problems out down the road. So I don't have any more questions in the app. I don't see any more on the screen. I've kind of run out of things to ask. Melanie, unless you've got one more thing, I think we're on time and done. And I thank everybody for participating in this. I've been trying to watch the total numbers of people, but other than that, I think we're all good. So
thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, folks.
Bye-bye.
Good luck the rest of the day.
Thanks. All right, bye-bye.